Dad, can you hear me singing? The little girl's voice barely carried across the wedding hall, sweet and uncertain, like a sparrow testing the morning air. Marcus Whitfield paused mid-tuning of his guitar, his calloused fingers stilling on the strings. His 3-year-old daughter, Lily, sat on a chair nearby, her small legs swinging as she hummed along to nothing in particular, just filling the silence the way children do when they're searching for connection. "Every note, sweetheart," Marcus whispered back, kneeling beside her. "Every single one." The grand ballroom of the Berkshire estate was a cathedral of cream and gold that evening, chandeliers casting amber light across silk tablecloths and towers of white roses. Marcus had been hired to provide live music, a gig that paid well enough to cover Lily's preschool tuition for 3 months. Since Sarah's sudden passing from a heart attack 14 months ago, every decision came down to numbers and necessity. But tonight, something felt different, heavier. Near the entrance, beneath an archway of magnolias, sat Natalie Ashford in her wheelchair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. At 25, she had the kind of quiet beauty that existed in watercolor paintings, soft auburn hair, thoughtful gray eyes that held entire conversations without speaking. Her fingers, though still, bore traces of paint beneath the nails. She'd been working on a canvas that morning, trying to capture how light broke through storm clouds. Creating art from her wheelchair had become her language when her legs had fallen silent. The accident had taken everything 3 years ago. Her mother's laughter, her own ability to dance, the life she'd imagined. "There she is, Garrett's charity case." The voice cut through the classical music like glass shattering. Natalie's shoulders tensed. She knew that voice, knew the cruelty that lived inside it. Devon Cross stood with a champagne flute, his expensive suit and practiced smile drawing a small crowd. He'd been Natalie's boyfriend before the accident, before the night that changed everything. "I mean, it's admirable," he continued, loud enough for half the room to hear. Her father probably paid the groom's family to make sure she'd have one last moment feeling normal. But let's be honest, who invites someone like that to a wedding? The room didn't gasp. It did something worse. It went quiet, the kind of quiet that meant people were listening, considering, perhaps even agreeing. Natalie's father, Harrison Ashford, CEO of Ashford Technologies and one of the most powerful men in Massachusetts, stood frozen across the room, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. But he didn't move. Couldn't, perhaps. Years of boardroom negotiations hadn't prepared him for this. Marcus saw it all from his position near the small stage, saw the girl in the wheelchair trying to make herself smaller, saw the man in the expensive suit feeding on her humiliation, saw the room full of people doing absolutely nothing. Lily tugged his sleeve. "Dad, why is that man being mean?" Something old and fierce stirred in Marcus's chest. He thought of Sarah, who'd spent her last years volunteering at children's hospitals, who taught him that silence in the face of cruelty was its own kind of violence. He set down his guitar and walked toward the center of the room. "Excuse me." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. The musician's training. "I couldn't help but overhear, and I'm wondering something. Devon, is it? I'm wondering if you've ever created anything beautiful in your life." Devon turned, eyebrows raised, clearly amused. "Who are you?" "Someone who recognizes cowardice when he sees it," Marcus replied evenly. "See, I've been watching Miss Ashford since I arrived tonight. She's been sitting there with more grace and dignity than anyone in this room. She hasn't demanded attention, hasn't complained. She's just present. And somehow that threatens you enough to mock her in public?" "This is none of your business," Devon snapped. "You made it everyone's business the moment you opened your mouth," Marcus said. "And here's what I know.
I know that after my wife died, I had to learn how to be both mother and father to my daughter. I had to learn that strength isn't about what you can do with your body. It's about what you refuse to let break inside your soul." He turned to Natalie, his voice softening. "I saw your hands earlier, paint under the nails. My wife was an artist too. She always said that creating something beautiful was the bravest thing a person could do, because it meant believing the world deserved beauty, even when the world had been cruel." Natalie's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of shame anymore. Harrison Ashford finally moved, crossing the room to his daughter, his own eyes wet. He knelt beside her wheelchair, this man who commanded boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, and took her hand. "Natalie, I'm so sorry. I've been so focused on protecting your body that I forgot to protect your heart. I've been treating you like something fragile when you're the strongest person I know."
What no one knew, what Natalie hadn't told anyone, was that her father had been secretly funding an experimental therapy program, not to fix her, but because she'd mentioned once, quietly, that she missed painting while standing at an easel. He'd spent 2 years and considerable resources not trying to change who she'd become, but trying to give her back a choice she thought she'd lost. And Marcus hadn't mentioned that the real reason he'd taken this gig, despite it being 2 hours from home, was because the payment was going toward a surgery fund. Not for Lily, but for a little boy named Thomas in her preschool who needed a cochlear implant. Sarah had taught him that kindness multiplied itself in unexpected ways. Natalie looked at her father, then at Marcus, then at little Lily, who was now standing beside her wheelchair, offering her a crumpled flower from the centerpiece. "You're really pretty," Lily said simply. "Can you teach me to paint?" Natalie laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and genuine. "I would love that." Devon had already slipped away, his audience gone, his cruelty exposed for the emptiness it was. Later, as Marcus played a soft melody on his guitar, one Sarah had loved, Natalie sat nearby, Lily in her lap, the little girl's head resting against her shoulder. Harrison stood behind them, one hand on his daughter's shoulder, finally understanding that protection and love weren't about shielding someone from the world, but about standing beside them while they faced it. "Dad," Natalie whispered, echoing the question she'd stopped asking 3 years ago. "Can you hear me singing?" And Harrison, his voice breaking with emotion and recognition, whispered back, "Every note, sweetheart, every single one." The moral wove itself quietly through every moment, that kindness isn't a grand gesture, it's the choice to speak when silence would be easier. It's seeing someone's humanity when the world has decided they're invisible. It's teaching our children that strength means lifting others, not standing on them. Because at the end of every story about cruelty, there's always a choice. And sometimes one voice is all it takes to remind a room full of people what it means to be human. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.